My name is Nerissa, and I'm 32 years old. I never imagined I'd be lying in an emergency room bed struggling to breathe as I watched my own family walk away. The doctor had just explained I needed expensive treatment for my severe allergic reaction, and without a word, they left me there to die. As panic took over my body, I heard a commotion outside the hospital windows, the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air. Moments later, Alexander Ross, my estranged billionaire husband, burst through the doors. You should have seen my family's faces when they realized who I had married. If you're watching this from somewhere around the world, drop a comment below to let me know. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to love you. Now let me tell you how I ended up married to a billionaire that my family never knew about. I grew up in a small Midwest town called Ridgemont, population just under 20,000. My childhood home was a modest two-story house on Maple Street, with faded blue paint and a front porch that creaked when you walked on it. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. My father Frank worked as a manager at the local manufacturing plant, and my mother Martha was an administrative assistant at the elementary school. From my earliest memories, I always felt like I was living in a shadow. The shadow belonged to my older sister, Diane. 3 years my senior, Diane was everything I wasn't. She had our mother's golden blonde hair and our father's striking blue eyes, while I had inherited my grandmother's mousy brown hair and unremarkable hazel eyes. Diane was a natural athlete who collected trophies like other kids collected comic books. She was popular, outgoing, and seemed to excel at everything she touched. I, on the other hand, preferred the company of books to people. While Diane was cheered on at soccer games and track meets, I spent my time in the local library devouring every book I could get my hands on. My parents rarely attended the academic competitions I participated in, even when I placed first in the state science fair during my sophomore year of high school. Nerissa, honey, it's wonderful that you won your little science thing, but we promised Diane we'd take her shopping for her homecoming dress today. My mother said, not even looking up from the magazine she was reading. That was the pattern of my childhood. Diane's achievements were celebrated with special dinners and proud announcements to relatives. My achievements were acknowledged with distracted nods and quick changes of subject to whatever Diane was doing. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became a refrain I heard so often that it ceased to sting after a while. It just became background noise like the hum of the refrigerator or the ticking of the living room clock. Everything changed when I was 16. The manufacturing plant where my father worked closed down, leaving him unemployed. Suddenly, our middle-class comfort was replaced by financial anxiety. My mother picked up extra hours at the school cleaning classrooms after her administrative duties were finished. My father tried to find another management position, but ended up taking a job as a night security guard that paid less than half his previous salary. Diane was 17 at the time, in her senior year of high school. Despite our family's financial troubles, my parents insisted on maintaining her lifestyle. They took out loans to ensure she could still attend her senior prom in a designer dress, still participate in all her sports with top-of-the-line equipment, still go on her senior trip to Florida with her friends. When it came time for Diane to go to college, my parents remortgaged our house to help pay for her to attend a private university, where she had received a partial athletic scholarship. Meanwhile, I was told in no uncertain terms that there wouldn't be money for my education. "Be realistic, Nerissa," my father said one night after I'd mentioned my dream of studying economics at an East Coast university. "We just don't have the money to send both of you to college. Besides, you're smart. You can get a decent job right out of high school and help support the family." I remember staring at him across the dinner table, fork suspended midway to my mouth. "What about scholarships? I have better grades than Diane. I could qualify for academic scholarships." My mother sighed, that particular sigh she reserved for when I was being difficult. "Scholarships are so competitive, honey. And even with scholarships, there are still expenses. Books, housing, food, it all adds up. Diane needs this opportunity. Her sports are her future." "What about my future?" I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I channeled all my hurt and anger into my studies. If scholarships were competitive, then I would be the most competitive. I would win my way out of this town, out of this family that couldn't see me. I stopped sleeping more than 4 or 5 hours a night. I took every advanced placement class my high school offered. I volunteered at the local hospital and the public library to build my resume. I wrote and rewrote my application essays until every word felt perfect. And it worked. In my senior year, I was offered a full scholarship to Eastridge University, one of the most prestigious schools in the country. The day the acceptance letter arrived was one of the happiest of my life. I ran into our house waving the envelope, my heart pounding with excitement. "Mom, Dad, I got a full scholarship to Eastridge." My father glanced up from his newspaper. "Eastridge? That's all the way on the East Coast. Who's going to help your mother around the house if you go that far away? And who's going to contribute to the household expenses?" My mother added. "We were counting on your income, Nerissa. Diane's tuition just went up again." I stood there, letter clutched in my hand, my moment of triumph crumbling around me. "But it's a full scholarship. This is my chance. My future." "Your future is here with your family," my father said firmly. "Family comes first, Nerissa. I thought we taught you that." But they hadn't taught me that. They had taught me that Diane came first, that I was second, always second. That night I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I accepted the scholarship to Eastridge and began secretly preparing to leave. I set up a separate bank account where I deposited money from my part-time job at the local bookstore. I arranged for my high school transcripts to be sent directly to the university. I filled out all the necessary paperwork for housing and orientation. 2 weeks before I was scheduled to leave, I finally told my parents my plans. The argument that followed was explosive. My father called me selfish and ungrateful. My mother cried and accused me of abandoning the family in their time of need. Diane watched silently from the doorway, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "If you walk out that door," my father threatened, "don't expect to be welcomed back with open arms." I left anyway. With 2 suitcases containing everything I valued, I boarded a Greyhound bus bound for the East Coast. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched my hometown shrink in the distance, feeling both terrified and exhilarated by my newfound freedom. During my first few years at Eastridge, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Occasional phone calls on holidays, brief emails updating them on my academic progress. Their responses were always the same. When was I coming home? How much money could I send them? Had I reconsidered my selfish decision, I threw myself into my studies, determined to prove that I had made the right choice. I graduated with honors in economics, my name at the top of every dean's list. But there was no one in the audience to cheer for me when I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. Little did I know that the true turning point in my life was yet to come in the form of a chance encounter at a coffee shop near campus. To support myself during my time at Eastridge, I worked part-time at the Copper Cup, an upscale coffee shop frequented by professors and wealthy students. The pay was decent, the hours flexible enough to accommodate my class schedule, and the atmosphere conducive to studying during slow periods. It was during one of these slow periods, a rainy Tuesday afternoon in October of my junior year, that I first met Alexander Ross. I was sitting at a corner table during my break, deeply absorbed in an advanced econometrics textbook, when a deep voice interrupted my concentration. "Molyneux's Theory of Competitive Markets. Heavy reading for a coffee break." I looked up, slightly annoyed at the interruption, to find a tall man with dark hair and intelligent gray eyes looking down at my book. He was dressed simply in a charcoal sweater and jeans that nonetheless looked expensive. I had seen him in the coffee shop before, always sitting alone with his laptop, always leaving generous tips. "It's for my advanced economic theory class," I replied, placing a finger on the page to mark my place. "Undergraduate or graduate level?" he asked, a hint of genuine curiosity in his voice. "Undergraduate, for now." I couldn't help adding that last part. I had already decided to pursue a PhD after graduation. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Ambitious, I like that." I expected him to walk away, then our brief interaction complete. Instead, he gestured to the empty chair across from me. "May I?" Something about his direct gaze made me nod, despite my usual reticence with strangers. He sat down gracefully, extending his hand. "Alexander Ross." I shook his hand, noting his firm grip. "Nerissa Jenkins." Nerissa. Unusual name. From Shakespeare, right? The sea captain's daughter in Twelfth Night. I couldn't hide my surprise. Most people asked me if my parents had misspelled Melissa on my birth certificate. Yes, actually. My mother had a brief interest in Shakespeare when she was pregnant with me. It didn't last. I winced inwardly at the bitterness that had crept into my voice. Alexander didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't comment. Instead, he nodded toward my textbook. So, economics. What draws you to the dismal science? For the next 20 minutes until the end of my break, we discussed economic theories and market trends. Alexander was knowledgeable and insightful, asking questions that challenged me to think deeper about concepts I thought I understood. When I stood to return to work, he seemed genuinely disappointed that our conversation was ending. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, and I found myself nodding before I could overthink it. Our coffee shop conversations became a regular occurrence over the next few months. I learned that Alexander had founded a tech company that specialized in artificial intelligence solutions. What I didn't realize until much later was that Ross Technologies was one of the fastest growing companies in the country. And Alexander was not just successful, but wealthy beyond my comprehension. He never mentioned his wealth or status. He dressed well, but simply drove a modest car, and seemed more interested in discussing ideas than material possessions. I found myself looking forward to our conversations opening up to him in ways I hadn't with anyone else. 3 months after our first meeting, Alexander asked me to dinner. I hesitated, aware of the decade between us and the vastly different worlds we inhabited. But there was something about him that felt safe, genuine, a quality I had rarely encountered in others. "Just dinner, Nerissa. If you're uncomfortable at any point, I'll have my driver take you straight home." Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a side street. No flashy displays of wealth, no obvious attempts to impress me with expensive wine or elaborate food. Just good pasta and better conversation that stretched late into the night. As Alexander walked me to my door afterward, he didn't try to kiss me or invite himself in. He simply took my hand, squeezed it gently, and asked if he could see me again. Over the next year, our relationship deepened. Alexander was patient, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. He respected my independence and supported my academic goals without trying to take over or direct my path. It was 6 months into our relationship when I discovered who Alexander really was. We were walking through the park when a business magazine at a newsstand caught my eye. There on the cover was Alexander's face next to the headline, "AI Genius Alexander Ross's Billion-Dollar Empire." I stopped in my tracks, staring at the magazine, then at the man beside me who had just bought us hot dogs from a street vendor. "You're a billionaire." Alexander looked uncomfortable for the first time since I'd known him. I don't usually lead with that information. It tends to change how people interact with me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling strangely betrayed. Would it have mattered? Would you have agreed to have coffee with me if you'd known? I considered this honestly. Probably not. I would have assumed you weren't serious about someone like me. Someone like you? His eyebrows drew together. You mean someone intelligent, driven, and genuinely interested in ideas rather than status. You're exactly the type of person I want in my life, Nerissa. The sincerity in his eyes melted my momentary anger. Still, his wealth created a new dynamic in our relationship, one I wasn't entirely comfortable with. When he offered to pay off my student loans, I refused. When he suggested I move into his penthouse apartment, I insisted on keeping my small studio near campus. I was determined to complete my degree on my own terms, to stand on my own feet. Alexander respected these boundaries, though I could tell he found them frustrating at times. "It's not about controlling you," he explained one night after a minor argument about him wanting to buy me a new laptop. "It's about wanting to share what I have with someone I love." Love. The word hung between us the first time either of us had spoken it aloud. I felt it too, had felt it for months, but had been afraid to acknowledge it. The gulf between our worlds seemed too vast to bridge, but love, it turns out, is less concerned with economic disparities than we are. 8 months after our first date, on an ordinary Tuesday evening in his kitchen as we cooked dinner together, Alexander asked me to marry him. No elaborate proposal, no expensive ring thrust in my face. Just a simple question asked while chopping vegetables for a stir-fry. "I can't imagine my life without you in it," he said, setting down his knife and turning to face me fully. "Marry me, Nerissa. Be my partner in everything." I said yes, but with conditions. I wanted to finish my degree before we lived together full-time. I wanted a small private ceremony without media attention. And most importantly, I didn't want to tell my family yet. They've never supported me, I explained when Alexander questioned this last condition. They've never been happy for my successes. I'm not ready to share this part of my life with them. Alexander agreed, though reluctantly. They're still your family. Eventually, you might want to bridge that gap. 2 weeks later, we were married at the courthouse, with only Alexander's best friend and my roommate as witnesses. I wore a simple white dress I already owned, though Alexander had offered to buy me any gown I desired. He respected my wish to keep our marriage private, ensuring that no news of our union leaked to the press or social media. We settled into a strange arrangement where I continued living in my studio apartment near campus during the week, focusing on my studies, and spent weekends at Alexander's penthouse. It wasn't conventional, but it worked for us. Alexander supported my education emotionally and intellectually, while respecting my need for independence. I was happier than I had ever been secure in a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine love. I was 3 months away from graduation, with plans to pursue a master's degree afterward, when the call came that would upend everything. It was a Tuesday evening in late April. I was in my apartment surrounded by textbooks and notes preparing for final exams when my phone rang. Seeing Diane's name on the screen was unusual enough to make me answer immediately. My sister and I rarely spoke more than once every few months. "Nerissa, you need to come home right away." Diane's voice was tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. "Mom's in the hospital. It's serious." My blood ran cold. Despite our complicated relationship, she was still my mother. "What happened?" "She collapsed at work yesterday. The doctors think it might be her heart. They're running tests, but Dad's freaking out about the medical bills. We don't have insurance since he got laid off from his last job." Diane's voice cracked slightly. "We need you, Neri." The childhood nickname, one I hadn't heard in years, made my throat tighten. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised. After ending the call, I sat motionless for several minutes, my mind racing. Final exams were 2 weeks away. I was so close to finishing my degree. But how could I focus on economics when my mother was hospitalized? I called Alexander next, intending to tell him about the situation to ask for his advice. But when his warm, concerned voice answered, something stopped me. A lifetime of handling family problems alone, of being told that family burdens were mine to bear, made the words die in my throat. "Is everything okay, Nerissa?" he asked when I remained silent too long. "Just stressed about finals." I lied. "I might need to go dark for a couple of weeks to study. I probably won't be able to come over this weekend." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Of course." I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. "I just need to focus right now." I booked a bus ticket to Ridgemont for the next morning. I packed enough clothes for a week, assuming I'd be back in time for my exams. I emailed my professors explaining that a family emergency had arisen and asking for some flexibility with deadlines. Most were understanding, though. One reminded me sternly that final exams could not be rescheduled. The bus ride home was long and uncomfortable, giving me too much time to think. I had avoided returning to Ridgemont for years, making excuses about coursework and part-time jobs. Now I was heading back into the lion's den, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to resist falling into old patterns. When I arrived at Ridgemont General Hospital, I found my father pacing the waiting room, looking older and more haggard than I remembered. Diane sat nearby, scrolling through her phone, seemingly unconcerned. Neither of them looked particularly happy to see me. "Finally," my father grunted by way of greeting. "Took you long enough." I swallowed the retort that rose to my lips. "How's Mom?" "Stable. They're saying she needs bypass surgery. Triple bypass." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "The cost is going to bankrupt us." "No, how are you, Nerissa?" "No, thank you for coming. Just straight to the financial implications." I should have expected nothing less. Over the next few days, as my mother stabilized and surgery was scheduled, the true extent of my family's expectations became clear. They didn't just want my emotional support during this crisis. They wanted me to drop out of university permanently, move back to Ridgemont, and get a full-time job to help pay the medical bills. "It's only one semester," my father argued when I protested. You can always go back later. Later when mom's bills are paid, when Diane decides she wants to go back for her master's degree. When exactly would it be my turn again? I asked, anger finally breaking through my carefully constructed calm. My father's face hardened. This is your mother we're talking about, Nerissa. Your family. Or have you become too good for us with your fancy education? The emotional manipulation was familiar territory. I had just never been strong enough to recognize it for what it was before. But the truth was, I couldn't abandon my mother when she needed help. Despite everything, despite the years of feeling second best, I couldn't walk away from her in her time of need. So I made what I thought would be a temporary sacrifice. I requested a leave of absence from the university, explaining my family situation. I found a job at a local insurance company that offered a decent salary. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, now stripped of most of my possessions, and used primarily for storage. I told myself it would just be for a few months, just until my mother recovered, just until the immediate financial crisis passed. Then I would return to my life, to Alexander, to my future. I was too ashamed to tell Alexander the truth. How could I explain that I had abandoned our life together, my education, our future, because my family had once again made me feel that my dreams and goals were secondary to their needs? Instead, I created a web of half-truths, telling him that I needed time to focus on a challenging independent study project, that the university had approved my working remotely for a semester. Alexander was skeptical, hurt by my sudden distance. Our phone calls became shorter, more strained. He offered repeatedly to fly out to visit me at the university, and each time I created elaborate excuses why now wasn't a good time. I could feel him pulling away, confused and hurt by my behavior, but respecting my apparent need for space. Meanwhile, my mother's surgery was successful, but the recovery period was longer than expected. Medical bills piled up, and I found myself working overtime to help cover them. My father remained unemployed, claiming back problems prevented him from finding work. Diane continued her carefree lifestyle, rarely visiting our mother, and contributing nothing to the household expenses. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I returned home to find Diane wearing a new designer outfit, complete with expensive shoes and handbag. "How can you afford that?" I asked, gesturing to her clothes. "I thought you were between jobs." Diane shrugged carelessly. "I have my ways. Some of us don't need to work boring insurance jobs to get by." Something in her tone, a hint of smugness I had heard too many times before, made me snap. "Are you using the money I'm sending for mom's bills to buy clothes?" Her momentary flicker of guilt was all the confirmation I needed. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I'm working 60-hour weeks. I've put my entire life on hold, and you're stealing money meant for mom's medical care." "Don't be so dramatic," Diane scoffed. "Mom's fine. The hospital is going to get paid eventually. What's the big deal if I borrow a little for necessities? Designer shoes are necessities now." Our argument escalated, drawing our father from his television show in the living room. Instead of being outraged at Diane's theft, he defended her. "Your sister needs to maintain appearances for job interviews," he said, waving away my concerns. "Besides, you're doing fine. That fancy education of yours is finally being put to good use." The truth hit me like a physical blow. They had never intended for me to go back to school. They had never seen this as a temporary arrangement. They had manipulated me using my mother's illness to pull me back into the role I had always played in the family, the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who sacrificed so Diane could shine. "How much did mom's surgery actually cost?" I asked, suddenly, suspicion blooming in my mind. My father shifted uncomfortably. "What does that matter? Medical care is expensive." "Show me the bills," I insisted. "All of them. Now." Reluctantly, he retrieved a folder from his desk. As I flipped through the papers, my suspicion solidified into certainty. The hospital had offered a significant discount due to our family's financial situation. Insurance I didn't know they had was covering a portion. The actual amount needed was less than half what they had told me. "You lied to me," I said, looking up at my father, then at Diane. "You've been taking the money I send and using it for, what, new clothes, cable TV, beer." I gestured to the six-pack visible in our refrigerator, an expense I would never have approved if money was as tight as they claimed. Now, Nerissa, don't be like that. My father began, his tone conciliatory, but his eyes cold. Family helps family. You've done well for yourself with that education we sacrificed to give you. Sacrificed? I repeated incredulously. You told me there was no money for my education. You made me fight for every scholarship, every opportunity. You told me I needed to stay here to work to support the family. Meanwhile, you remortgaged the house to send Diane to a private university. Diane had potential. My mother's voice came from the doorway, startling us all. She stood there in her bathrobe, looking pale but determined. She was going to be somebody. You were always just ordinary, practical, reliable. We knew you'd be fine wherever you ended up. The casual cruelty of her assessment, delivered without a hint of remorse, struck me silent. For years, I had told myself that my parents loved me in their own way, that they simply didn't understand my dreams. But in that moment, I saw the truth. They saw me as a resource, not a daughter, a reliable workhorse, not a person with hopes and ambitions of my own. I'm leaving, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Tonight, I'm going back to finish my degree. If you walk out that door, my father threatened, don't expect any help from us ever again. No money for tuition, no place to stay if you fail. I laughed, the sound hollow. When have you ever helped me? When have you ever put my needs first? I've been on my own since I was 18 years old, and I've done just fine. You ungrateful little, my father began, his face reddening with anger. Save it, I interrupted, turning toward the stairs to pack my belongings. I'm done. As I threw clothes into my suitcase, I could hear them downstairs. My father's angry voice, my mother's tearful accusations, Diane's snide comments, the familiar symphony of emotional manipulation that had been the soundtrack to my childhood. I called a taxi and waited for it on the front porch, unwilling to spend another minute inside that house. As the car pulled up, my father came outside, his expression thunderous. If you leave now, you're no longer part of this family, he declared. You understand that, right? You're choosing your selfish ambitions over your own mother who nearly died. I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. I saw not the imposing figure of my childhood, but a small, petty man who used fear and obligation to control others. I understand perfectly, I replied, getting into the taxi. I'm choosing myself. For once in my life, I'm putting myself first. As the taxi pulled away, I felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. I was mourning the family I had always wanted, but never had, while simultaneously freeing myself from the burden of trying to earn love that was never freely given. I checked into a motel near the bus station, planning to leave for the East Coast in the morning. I was mentally calculating how quickly I could return to university, how I might explain my prolonged absence to Alexander, when the first symptoms appeared: a tightness in my chest, difficulty breathing, swelling around my eyes and mouth. I had been prescribed medication for anxiety during my time back in Ridgemont. I had taken a dose to help me sleep in the motel. What I didn't know was that I was severely allergic to one of its components. By midnight, I could barely breathe. I fumbled for my phone, managing to dial 911, before collapsing on the motel room floor. The emergency room at Ridgemont General Hospital was chaotically busy that night. A multi-vehicle accident on the highway had brought in several critical patients, stretching the small hospital's resources thin. I was triaged and placed on oxygen, but left waiting for a doctor as more urgent cases took priority. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the medication and lack of oxygen making it difficult to focus. A nurse periodically checked my vitals, looking increasingly concerned, but unable to do more without a doctor's orders. "We need to contact your family," she said during one of my more lucid moments. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" I tried to say no, but my swollen throat made speech difficult. The nurse found my phone and, seeing the recent calls, contacted my family. I wanted to protest but couldn't form the words. An hour later, through swollen eyelids, I saw my parents and Diane enter the emergency room. They spoke with the nurse, their expressions shifting from annoyance to concern as she explained the severity of my condition. Anaphylactic shock was potentially fatal, if not treated promptly and aggressively. A doctor finally approached looking harried. "She needs epinephrine and steroids immediately," he told my family, "and she'll need to be admitted for observation. The problem is without insurance, we'll need a deposit for continued treatment." I watched through a haze as my father's face tightened. "How much?" The doctor named a figure that made my father wince. "Can't you stabilize her and release her? We've already got medical bills up to our eyeballs for my wife's surgery." The doctor looked uncomfortable. "Sir, your daughter is in serious condition. This type of severe allergic reaction can rebound even after initial treatment. She needs to be monitored for at least 24 hours. My father pulled my mother and Diane aside. I couldn't hear their entire conversation, but fragments reached me. "Already drained our savings. Her choice to take that medication. Can't afford another hospital stay." I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with my medical condition. They were discussing whether my life was worth the expense, whether I was worth saving. Finally, my father approached the doctor again. "We'll pay for the emergency treatment, but we can't afford the hospital stay. Once she's stabilized, we'll take her home and watch her ourselves." The doctor looked skeptical. "That's really not advisable. Without proper monitoring equipment." "It's what we can do," my father interrupted firmly. The nurse administered the epinephrine injection, which provided immediate but temporary relief. I could breathe a little easier, though my throat and face remained swollen. The doctor ordered steroids and antihistamines to be administered intravenously. As the medications were being prepared, I heard my father tell my mother, "Let's go get some coffee. This is going to take a while." Diane didn't even pretend to want to stay. "I've got plans tonight. Text me when she's ready to go home." And just like that, they left. They walked out of the emergency room without a backward glance, without a word to me, without ensuring I was stable or comfortable or even conscious. They left me alone fighting for breath because waiting was inconvenient and paying for my care was too expensive. The nurse looked after them in disbelief. "They're leaving now." I tried to speak to explain that this was not unusual for my family, that I had never been a priority, but my swollen throat made it impossible. Tears leaked from my eyes, partly from the pain of the allergic reaction, partly from the final confirmation that my family saw me as a burden, rather than a beloved daughter and sister. The doctor returned frowning when he noticed my family's absence. "Where are your parents?" The nurse shook her head. "They left, said they'd be back later." The doctor's frown deepened. "We still need payment authorization for admission." He turned to me. "Ms. Jenkins is there, someone else we can call another family member. A friend." In that moment, with my throat closing again, despite the epinephrine with darkness creeping at the edges of my vision, with the knowledge that my family had abandoned me when I needed them most, I made a decision. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, which the nurse had placed on the bedside table. I scrolled to Alexander's number and pressed call. It went to voicemail. Of course it did. It was the middle of the night on the East Coast, and I had been avoiding his calls for months. Why would he answer now? At the beep, I managed to wheeze out a few words. "Alexander, hospital, Ridgemont General, can't breathe, please." I lost consciousness before I could say more, the phone slipping from my fingers. I'm not sure how long I was unconscious. I drifted in and out, aware of the busy emergency room around me, of nurses checking my vitals with increasing concern of the doctor ordering additional medication as my condition deteriorated again. "We need to admit her now," I heard him say. "Her throat's closing again. We can sort out payment later." "Administration won't approve it without at least a partial deposit," the nurse replied. "Not after what happened with the Wilson family last month." I was dying, and they were discussing hospital policy. The irony wasn't lost on me, even in my semi-conscious state. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the hospital. A sound like helicopter blades cutting through the air, raised voices, running feet. The emergency room doors burst open, and through my swollen eyelids, I saw a tall figure striding purposefully toward the nurse's station. Even in my compromised state, I recognized Alexander immediately. He was dressed in jeans and a rumpled sweater, his hair disheveled, his face tight with fear. "Nerissa Jenkins," he demanded. "Where is she?" A security guard tried to intercept him. "Sir, you can't just barge in here. Visiting hours are over and—" Alexander cut him off. "My wife is here and she's in danger. Nerissa Jenkins, or Nerissa Ross. I need to see her now." Wife. He had called me his wife. Despite everything, despite my deception and avoidance, he still claimed me as his own. The doctor who had been treating me approached Alexander. "Are you related to Ms. Jenkins?" "I'm her husband," Alexander replied without hesitation. "Where is she? How is she?" The doctor looked relieved. "She's experiencing a severe allergic reaction. She needs to be admitted immediately for observation and continued treatment, but there's been an issue with payment authorization." Alexander's expression darkened. "Payment? You're delaying treatment because of payment." He pulled out his wallet, extracting several cards. "Use whatever you need. Platinum, black, corporate, personal, I don't care. Just help her. Now." His authoritative tone brooked no argument. The doctor immediately directed him to my curtained area where I lay struggling for each breath. Alexander's face when he saw me was a study in anguish. "Nerissa," he whispered, taking my hand gently. "My God, why didn't you call me sooner?" I couldn't answer, couldn't explain the months of deception, the shame, the fear of disappointing him. All I could do was squeeze his hand weakly, trying to convey my relief and gratitude through touch alone. Alexander turned to the doctor, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Why isn't she on a ventilator? Why isn't she in the ICU?" As I explained, there were payment issues and— "Fix it," Alexander interrupted. "Now, whatever she needs, whatever specialist you need to call in. Price is no object." The change in my treatment was immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, I was being prepared for transfer to the ICU. A specialist was called in from a larger hospital in the next county. Additional medications were administered to reduce the swelling in my throat and prevent further complications. Through it all, Alexander never left my side. He held my hand, spoke softly to me, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. The anger I had glimpsed earlier was contained, channeled into ensuring I received the best possible care. As I was being wheeled toward the elevator to the ICU, there was a commotion near the emergency room entrance. My family had returned looking annoyed rather than concerned after their coffee break. Their expressions changed to shock when they saw me on a gurney surrounded by medical personnel with Alexander at my side. "What's happening?" my father demanded. "We didn't authorize any additional treatment." Alexander's head snapped up at the sound of my father's voice. His eyes narrowed as he made the connection. "You're Nerissa's family." My father nodded, looking Alexander up and down with suspicion. "Who are you?" "I'm her husband," Alexander replied, his voice cold. "The husband she never told you about. The one who, unlike you, gives a damn whether she lives or dies." My family's jaws literally dropped in unison. If I hadn't been fighting for breath, I might have laughed at the comic timing of their shocked expressions. "Husband," my mother repeated weakly. "Nerissa's married." Alexander ignored her, turning to the doctor. "Please continue with her transfer to the ICU. I'll handle this." He gave my hand one more gentle squeeze before stepping away to confront my family. As I was wheeled into the elevator, the last thing I saw was Alexander standing tall and unyielding before my stunned family, his protective fury a palpable force in the room. I spent 3 days in the intensive care unit of Ridgemont General Hospital. The allergic reaction had been more severe than initially thought, affecting not just my respiratory system, but also causing dangerous inflammation around my heart. Under Alexander's instructions, specialists were flown and treatments expedited, and no expense spared. During those 3 days, Alexander never left the hospital. He slept in a chair beside my bed, worked remotely from his laptop when I was sleeping, and personally reviewed every treatment plan with the doctors. When I was finally able to speak again after the worst of the swelling subsided, he was the first person I saw. "You came," I whispered, my voice still hoarse. Alexander took my hand, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Of course I came. Did you think I wouldn't—" "I lied to you," I admitted, tears welling in my eyes. "For months. About where I was, what I was doing. I was too ashamed to tell you the truth. About your mother's illness, about coming back to help your family." Alexander's voice was gentle without accusation. I looked at him in surprise. "You knew?" He nodded. Not at first. But when you started making excuses when you wouldn't let me visit, I hired someone to find out if you were okay. I was worried, Nerissa. I thought you might be in some kind of trouble. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. I'm so sorry. I thought you'd be disappointed in me for abandoning my education for putting my family first after everything I'd said about building my own life. Disappointed. Alexander looked genuinely puzzled. Why would I be disappointed that you showed compassion to your family despite how they've treated you? That speaks to your character, not against it. But our plans, my degree, can be resumed whenever you're ready, he finished for me. Life isn't linear, Nerissa. Plans change. What doesn't change is how I feel about you. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by his understanding and forgiveness. My family. Did you talk to them after I was taken to the ICU? Alexander's expression hardened slightly. Yes, it was illuminating. What did they say? Your father tried to convince me that they had every intention of getting you proper treatment, that they were just discussing options when I arrived. Your mother cried about how worried they had been. And your sister, well, she seemed most interested in what I did for a living and where I lived. Despite everything, I couldn't help a small bitter laugh. That sounds about right. Alexander's grip on my hand tightened. They abandoned you, Nerissa. They left you in an emergency room struggling to breathe because it was inconvenient and expensive to stay. When I arrived, they had been gone for over 2 hours. The doctor told me your condition was deteriorating. If I hadn't come when I did, he couldn't finish the sentence, his voice breaking. Thank you, I whispered, for coming, for not giving up on me. Never, he replied fiercely. I would never give up on you, not even when you were doing your best to push me away. His expression softened. But we need to talk about why you felt you couldn't tell me the truth. What were you afraid of? It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself since he arrived. I think I was afraid of being vulnerable, of needing help. My whole life, needing help has been seen as weakness in my family, and I didn't want you to see me as weak. Alexander shook his head. Needing help doesn't make you weak, Nerissa. It makes you human. We all need help sometimes, even billionaires. His attempt at lightness fell flat as his voice cracked again. Especially billionaires who almost lose their wives because they're too stubborn to ask for help. On the second day of my hospital stay, my family attempted to visit. Alexander intercepted them in the waiting room. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see through the glass walls of my ICU room. Alexander stood rigid, his back to me, gesturing occasionally with controlled precision. My father seemed to be arguing, my mother crying, Diane looking sullen. Whatever Alexander said to them, they eventually left without seeing me. When he returned to my room, I asked what had happened. I told them you needed rest, he said simply, and that when you were ready to see them, if ever, would be entirely your decision. On the third day, when I was stronger, Alexander finally told me the full story of how he had found me. After receiving my desperate voicemail, he had immediately chartered a private helicopter, the fastest way to reach Ridgemont from New York City. He had tracked my phone's location using the emergency services feature I had enabled on our shared account months ago. When I heard your voice so weak asking for help, I've never been so terrified in my life, he admitted. I thought I might lose you before I could even find you. The doctors recommended I be transferred to a better-equipped hospital in New York City. Once I was stable enough to travel, Alexander arranged for a medical helicopter to transport me, complete with a full medical team. As I was being prepared for transport, he asked if I wanted to say goodbye to my family. I thought about it carefully, weighing my lingering sense of obligation against the clear evidence of their true feelings toward me. No, I decided finally. Not now. Maybe someday, but not now. Alexander nodded, respecting my decision without question. As the medical team wheeled me toward the helipad on the hospital roof, I caught a glimpse of my family in the parking lot below. They were staring up at the helicopter with expressions of disbelief and, if I wasn't mistaken, calculation. They had just discovered that their reliable, ordinary daughter had married a man wealthy enough to charter private medical helicopters without hesitation. I could almost see the gears turning in their minds, reassessing my value now that they understood what I might provide them. The thought no longer hurt as it once would have. I had seen them clearly at last, without the distorting lens of familial obligation or childhood conditioning. They had shown me exactly who they were when they left me alone in that emergency room. And Alexander had shown me who he was by flying across states in the middle of the night to save me. As the helicopter lifted off, I felt a curious sense of closure. I was leaving behind not just my hometown, but the version of myself who had allowed others to determine my worth. I was leaving with the man who loved me for exactly who I was, who had never tried to make me smaller or less ambitious or more convenient. I was going home in every sense of the word. My recovery in New York was slow but steady. Alexander had converted part of his penthouse into a temporary medical suite with round-the-clock nursing care for the first week. As I regained my strength, we had long conversations about our future, about the secrets and insecurities that had driven us apart, and about how to build a stronger foundation moving forward. "I want to finish my degree," I told him one evening as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset over the city skyline. "I was so close before all this happened." Alexander nodded. "I've already spoken with the dean at Eastridge. They're willing to work with you given the extraordinary circumstances. You can resume your studies next semester, or even take some courses online this summer if you feel up to it." I turned to look at him, gratitude and love swelling in my heart. "You did that? Without knowing if that's what I wanted." He smiled. "I know you, Nerissa. Your education has always been important to you. It's part of what I admire about you. Your intelligence, your determination, your refusal to settle for less than you deserve." During my convalescence, I received multiple calls and messages from my family. At first, I ignored them all, not ready to revisit the pain they had caused. But as I grew stronger, both physically and emotionally, I realized that I needed to address the situation for my own peace of mind. With Alexander's support, I agreed to a video call with them about a month after my return to New York. Their faces on the screen were a strange mixture of familiar and foreign, as if I was seeing them clearly for the first time. "Nerissa's sweetheart," my mother began, her voice sickly sweet. "We've been so worried about you. How are you feeling?" "Better," I replied simply. "The doctors here have been excellent." "Here? Where exactly are you?" my father asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide his curiosity. "New York," I said, offering no further details. "With your husband," Diane interjected, emphasizing the word as if it was difficult to believe. "You never mentioned being married, Neri. That was quite a shock." I could almost see the dollar signs in her eyes as she spoke. The sister who had stolen money meant for our mother's medical care was now calculating how much she might extract from her newly valuable sibling. "Yes, with Alexander," I confirmed. "We've been married for over a year." "A year?" my mother exclaimed. "Why would you keep something like that secret from your own family?" The hypocrisy of her indignation after years of making me feel unwelcome and unimportant was almost amusing. "I think we all know why," I said quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the call. My father was the first to recover, shifting tactics with transparent abruptness. "Well, what's done is done. The important thing is that you're recovering well. We've been thinking, maybe we could come visit you in New York, see your new life, meet this husband of yours properly." I had anticipated this, had prepared myself for the inevitable moment when they would try to insert themselves into my life now that they perceived a benefit to doing so. "I don't think that's a good idea right now," I said calmly. "I'm still recovering and I'll be focusing on resuming my studies soon." "But we're family," my mother protested, her eyes welling with practiced tears. "After everything we've been through together—" "Yes, we are family," I agreed, cutting her off. "And that's why what happened at the hospital hurt so deeply. Family doesn't abandon each other in medical emergencies. Family doesn't calculate whether someone's life is worth the financial cost." My father's expression hardened. "Now that's not fair, Nerissa. We were going to come back. We just needed to figure out a plan." "A plan that involved leaving your daughter alone and struggling to breathe for over 2 hours." Alexander's voice came from off-screen. He moved into view, sitting beside me, his presence a solid comfort. The medical staff told me she could have died without intervention. My family seemed momentarily stunned into silence by Alexander's appearance. He was every inch the successful businessman today, dressed in a crisp shirt that probably cost more than my father's monthly salary. Mr. Ross. My father finally managed his tone, shifting to one of obsequious respect. We're so grateful for everything you've done for our Nerissa. There was simply a misunderstanding at the hospital. We would never intentionally put her at risk. Wouldn't you? Alexander's voice was quiet but cutting. From what Nerissa has told me, and from what I observed myself putting her at risk, is exactly what you've done throughout her life. Emotionally, financially, and most recently, physically. My mother's tears, which had been threatening, now flowed freely. That's not true. We love Nerissa. We've always wanted what's best for her. What's best for her, Alexander repeated. Like telling her there was no money for her education while remortgaging your house for her sister. Like manipulating her into leaving university to support you. Like taking the money she sent for medical bills and using it for shopping. I placed a hand on Alexander's arm not to silence him, but to show my support. This was my battle, but having him beside me made me stronger. I didn't call to argue about the past, I said, redirecting the conversation. I called to be clear about the future. I'm not cutting you out of my life completely, but there will be boundaries. I took a deep breath, then continued. I will not be sending money. I will not be visiting Ridgemont anytime soon. I will not be inviting you to New York until I'm ready, if ever. I am going to focus on my recovery, finish my education, and build my life with my husband. My father's face reddened with anger. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us, by cutting us off when we need help. What have you done for me exactly? I asked, genuinely curious about how he would characterize their treatment of me. We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. That's what parents do. Yes, that's what parents do. I agreed. They also support their children's dreams. They celebrate their achievements. They show up when they're needed. They don't abandon their daughter in an emergency room because waiting is inconvenient. Another silence fell, this one heavier than before. I'm not saying we can never have a relationship, I continued more gently. But it would need to be a different kind of relationship. One based on mutual respect, not on what you can get from me. Respect goes both ways, my father muttered. Yes, it does, I replied. And that's why I'm setting these boundaries now. I respect myself too much to continue in the old patterns. The call ended shortly after, with no real resolution. My family was hurt and angry, unable or unwilling to acknowledge their part in the breakdown of our relationship. But for the first time, I didn't carry their emotions as my own burden. I had spoken my truth, set my boundaries, and was prepared to live with the consequences. In the months that followed, I focused on healing both physically and emotionally. I returned to Eastridge University to complete my degree, graduating with honors the following spring. Alexander was in the front row at my graduation ceremony, cheering loudly as I walked across the stage. My family did not attend, though I had sent them an invitation. Instead, I received a text from Diane the day before. Can't make it? Send pictures. BTW, I'm thinking of going back to school myself. Any chance you and Alexander could help with tuition? Rather than responding with irritation, I found myself feeling a strange sort of pity. Diane had never learned to stand on her own feet, had never experienced the satisfaction of achieving something through her own efforts. In always being the golden child, she had been robbed of the opportunity to develop resilience and self-reliance. After graduation, inspired by my own experiences, I established a foundation to help patients without health insurance access necessary medical care. The Jenkins-Ross Emergency Care Fund ensured that no one would be left untreated due to financial considerations. It was my way of transforming a traumatic experience into something positive, something that might prevent others from facing the same desperate situation. A year after the incident at Ridgemont General, I received an unexpected visitor at the Foundation's office. Diane stood in the reception area, looking older and more subdued than I remembered. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple blouse and jeans that had seen better days. "Nerissa," she said, shifting uncomfortably under my surprised gaze. "You look good, healthy." Thank you, I replied, uncertain of her purpose in seeking me out. Would you like to come into my office? Once seated across from me, Diane struggled to maintain eye contact. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how we treated you. Mom and Dad still don't get it, but I think I'm starting to. I waited, giving her space to continue. I lost my job, she admitted. Actually, I've lost several jobs. Turns out being the golden child doesn't prepare you for the real world, where you can't charm your way out of every situation. She laughed humorlessly. I've been staying with a friend trying to figure out what to do next. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, genuinely meaning it. Despite everything, she was still my sister. I thought about going back to school, she continued, getting a practical degree, something with job prospects. But I can't afford it, and Mom and Dad are struggling themselves now that you're not. She trailed off, looking embarrassed. Now that I'm not sending money, I finished for her. She nodded. I know you probably think I'm just here to ask for money. And honestly, that was my plan when I found your office address. But sitting here seeing what you've built for yourself, I'm not sure that's what I want anymore. What do you want, Diane? I asked, curious, despite my wariness. A chance, she said simply. A chance to learn how to stand on my own like you did. I'm not asking for handouts. I'm asking for, I don't know, guidance maybe. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I had grown up with. But all I saw was exhaustion and a fragile hope. I won't give you money directly, I said finally, but I might be able to help you in other ways. The foundation offers educational grants for people looking to retrain in healthcare fields. If you're serious about going back to school, you could apply. Healthcare? Diane looked surprised. I never thought about that. It's just an option, I shrugged. The point is, I won't support you financially just because we're related, but I will support your efforts to build a better life for yourself the same way I did. She nodded slowly, a new respect visible in her eyes. That's fair. More than fair, actually, considering everything. As she left my office that day, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had found a way to honor the family connection without sacrificing my own well-being or principles. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a step toward a healthier relationship. Alexander was waiting for me at home that evening, eager to hear about my day. When I told him about Diane's visit, he listened thoughtfully. Are you okay with helping her after everything that happened? He asked. I considered the question carefully. I'm okay with helping her help herself, I replied. That's different from enabling the old patterns. And honestly, it feels good to break the cycle, to offer something constructive rather than just cutting ties completely. Alexander pulled me into a gentle embrace. You continue to amaze me, Nerissa Ross. Your capacity for growth, for transformation, is extraordinary. As I leaned into his strength, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the abandoned daughter in an emergency room to the confident woman I was now, running a foundation, completing my education, building a life of purpose and love. The emergency room had been my lowest point, but also the catalyst for profound change. When my family left me dying there, they had inadvertently set me free. And when Alexander's helicopter landed outside, it wasn't just a dramatic rescue. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was valued not for what I could provide, but for who I was. A chapter where love didn't come with conditions or expectations. A chapter where I finally understood that family isn't just about blood relations, but about who shows up when you need them most. Have you ever had a moment that changed everything? A time when someone showed up for you when you needed them most? Or perhaps when someone let you down and it became a turning point? Share your story in the comments below. And if this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell to make sure you never miss a new story. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the greatest gift is discovering who truly values you when it matters most.